I feel like Madonna with my mic. Hello, everybody. So I will start with, so I'm going to be moving my own slides, so I apologize if it gets a bit messy in the way. I hope it won't. So here's the first one. Okay, so since 2011, I've been collecting and archiving media production and all kinds of materials from Tahrir Square in Egypt, but also from various social global movements, looking at how history repeats itself, from China in '89 to Egypt, 2011, to Bahrain, to Hong Kong, to Sudan more recently, and Iraq and Lebanon, and so many more. I've been producing various artworks of what I call performing the Tahrir archive, studying the mechanisms of revolting through iconography of protests. And here you can see the database as it looks like today. It's a still from the database, so the whole entire archive is now online. And some of the things I've been looking at are how different images reproduce themselves across time and space and geographies. And here I start with something I'm sure you're all familiar with, Emmett Till in 55. And more recently, in the recent uprisings, Iran, we are all Nida, or Egypt, we are all Khalid Said, Hamza al-Khateeb in SYRIA, and more recently also in the US, I am Mike Brown. These are images of martyrs, usually, or many times. These images are, and these moments, and the death of these innocent citizens is what sparkled the movement. Many other way of looking at the archive is how fiction and reality have been merging much faster and faster than it has before, and how visual culture is inspired by history, and how history inspires visual culture, and how visual culture goes back to iconography of protest and vice versa. So it's a kind of dance between reality and fiction. So already the Joker was in Tahrir in 2012. And here you can see how recent protests, such as the ones in Lebanon, for example, but everywhere else in Chile and everywhere, and I'm sure you've all been looking at that too, has also been borrowing these images from our visual culture. So today I won't speak about all the projects I've been doing, because since 2011 it's been quite busy and prolific, especially there's been so much going on in the world. So I've been working very hard on trying to articulate and understand how to think about these revolutions and how to look at these iconographies. And so what I want to talk more about today or look at is the most recent works that I'm working on. So Anatomy of a Revolution is the kind of umbrella title that I use for a series of projects and publications, installations that are a lexicon, a manifesto, and an ABC book to learn the Arabic alphabet. So if you're interested, let me know. And games, interactive, but also analog. So this is a little bit of a snapshot into the Anatomy of Revolution publication that I'm working on. Here you can see Hitler's phone, the original phone, and a variety of words and cultural references, but also I can't see the slide here, but also like the way these images are collected and kind of are part of our collective memory and keep returning from one place to another. So this is about toppling dictators and the falling of their statues. Here, a comparison. So these are kind of like images that I've put together to show you a little bit how I've been thinking about looking at the history of art through this project, but also looking at this revolution through the lens of history of art, and how these images are much further, or much more old than the ones that we are seeing today on our social networks. Another image that I've also put here as a kind of sketch for this project, this will be like a 200 pages book, is, I'm sure, do you recognize Marilyn Monroe? Do you like, I love Marilyn Monroe. So Marilyn Monroe, but on the background of Marilyn Monroe is the assassination of Sadat, Anwar Sadat in Egypt, and this idea that the mechanisms of revolution tend to be similar across cultures, but also across geographies and also across time. But beyond these resonances, I'm really interested in looking at how we can think about our history from a wider perspective, including personal, transcultural, cross-disciplinary, and global. More examples here of how these images are already in our psyche and our collective memory. And another type of relationship is the work of Hannah Wilke and the image that was posted during the Egyptian revolution by this very young girl, 20 years old, who in the end had to leave Egypt and was threatened to basically to be murdered or arrested. So this is a detail where you see her as a graffiti and how that's been recuperated from the internet all the way down to the street, and how I've included this in the Monopoly game. So that's one of the games that I've been designing based on this collection of archive. And at the same time, it's a game, but at the same time, it's also a timeline of the Egyptian revolution. In our particular case, unfortunately, we've begun with military regime and we've come back to a military regime. So the circle is closed, but not for long. Language is a central aspect of revolutions. We talk a lot about visual language, but actually language as we speak is very important. And I remember in Tahrir when things started, how we were all very fascinated by how we were starting to use words that we never really heard before. And so many people discussed the importance of this new vocabulary that was shared. Of course, it was vocabulary that was essentially political, so even a word like constitution was new to a lot of us, dustur in Arabic. We never really used that in our conversations because nobody talked about politics. In Lebanon, for example, I was just in Beirut a couple of days ago. In Lebanon, for example, a lot of people are commenting on how Arabic is being kind of revived through this movement that's taking place at the moment, and how much more than usual, even people who tend to speak or write in English and French are using Arabic to communicate with the entire country. So inspired by this, here I get to use that button too. Here we go, backwards. So, these are, just so you know, so these are the book cover and the inside title of the book, which, if you want to learn Arabic, the alphabet, I'm happy to share with you. And I'm using here a variety of iconography from protest, including this one, the butterfly, which some of you may know, which dates from, I think, '66 in San Francisco, and it was one of the first protest riots that took place in the US, the Raucous trans riots. This project is also part of Anatomy of a Revolution, and it's inspired by these very small booklets that I've been collecting around the world. Here you have the Egyptian one from the 50s, but also a Russian booklet to teach children how to speak, how to read the alphabet. But these little innocent books are actually ways of indoctrinating children at a very early age, and to kind of bring them into becoming part of this military regime that is being forced upon them. So here. And a couple of pages from from this book. This is from the May '68 in Paris. It's police brutality in Arabic, and another one is army, also in Arabic. Or maybe you know this, I Am a Man, from the 1968 Memphis sanitation strike. And so these images travel from one place to another and are borrowed from one demonstration to another. So I'm sure you've all seen this too. I Am a Child, protest against the Trump administration family administration policy, which was very recently taking place in less than a year ago. This I Am a Man icon or iconography of protest in a way is, or slogan itself has been borrowed from Am I Not a Man and a Brother, which shows how our images travel across time, across space, and also across geographies. The more we know about the past, the better prepared we are for the future, said Theodore Roosevelt. So Anatomy of a Revolution attempts to write history beyond nationalism from a personal, cross-disciplinary, transcultural, and global perspective. I know, I've put a big task upon myself, but I like to collect and I like to work. To work together towards this new order, I believe that more than ever, we need to think globally and act locally. We need to know how these mechanisms work from one place to another and how they kind of are the thread that connects all of us. Oops, sorry. Wait. So Tunisia in 2010-2011 was to the Middle East what Tahrir Square became to the world. But what have these revolutions changed, and what are the current ones changing? And also, why is Tahrir archive, or why am I doing what I'm doing, and why are all these people collecting material that are also related to revolutions? Why are these archives and these initiatives necessary? This icon that is very recent, that comes from Sudan, I don't know if you've seen this, the Lady Liberty, has been associated to the Statue of Liberty, is a very good example of how the individual body is, in this case, an unprecedented one because it's a woman, reaches out to the crowd and becomes part of the fabric of protest. The synergy between people, the kind of coming together that takes place. I don't know if any of you have been in a very massive, I'm sure you have, but if you've been in an actual uprising in one of these countries, I'm sure you've felt how coming together with everybody around you creates a kind of shift in consciousness, and it's very instantaneous and immediate. I believe that it's changing our DNA at the very level of our cells. At least that's how I felt when I was in Tahrir. And I see it happening. I was in Beirut a couple of days ago, and I see it happening around me. I mean, the level of energy that's deployed is unbelievable. What happens also in these kind of moments, and this is why this image is interesting or important, is the sort of reaching out, pointing to the sky, connecting to the earth, and also looking at the crowd as a part of ourselves is also a way of how these encounterings, how these collective moments become also places for creating, for living new experiences, and also for knowledge production. So many of these, I will go through some of the examples of how this works, but before I do, I would like to show you the video that's been viral and that's come out more or less a week ago in Lebanon. So I don't know, is there anybody here who speaks Arabic besides my friend Mukhtar at the front of the audience? Only? Where are you guys? Okay, some of them are on the internet looking at me. You speak Arabic? Anybody speaks Spanish? Chile? Revolution? Anyone? Hello? The world is going crazy. Where are you? No? Little bit. Okay. Well, so let's speak Arabic. Let's learn at least one word. Do you know how to say revolution in Arabic? How do you say revolution in Arabic, my friend? Saura. Saura. Okay, so sing along.
سمع صوتك يا بلادي تليفونات تحت عطموها هيك ورا عطموها وخلي ثورة ضوية قولوا معي سمع صوتك يا بلادي دخيل الله ما أحلاكم يلا معي صوتك يا بلادي والحر ينادي صوتك يا بلادي والحر ينادي ساحة أحرار شعبي ثوار ضد الفساد والاستبداد كرمالك بلدي مستقبل ولدي كرمالك بلدي.
This is how we do it in Lebanon. I've read a lot. I say I clap for Lebanon. I clap for Lebanon essentially because I'm Lebanese also, but also for all the other countries that are fighting at the moment. So DJs we have in our revolution, thanks to the very poor military apparatus and police apparatus that we have in Lebanon. I'll talk about this later, or maybe not. But anyway, so this is in Tripoli in the north of Lebanon, and it's a very interesting moment in terms of, this is a whole other talk, but basically how these mechanisms are also shifting as we're moving forward in time. And to go back in time, Tahrir cinema, this was in 2011 in Egypt. And it's a little bit like, this is a few examples that I'm going to go through now that show how protesters, people are thinking that because we went back to a military regime, nothing really changed, but that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't matter. Politics change very slowly. The French Revolution took 80 years to become successful, or to actually become it took 80 years for France to become a republic. So this can take a long time, but really what's at stake here is that society changes immediately as we protest. And as we protest, we're demanding a new order, but as we're demanding a new order, we are also reclaiming territory, we're reclaiming public spaces, and we're engaging with each other in ways that is completely new. A very recent example is the egg. Have you been to Beirut, anybody? No? So center of Beirut is on Martyr Square is the old Lebanese theater, which we call the Egg. And very early on of the protests, the professors from AUB took over the Egg to engage with the protesters and bring their classes to the revolution, as well as encourage conversations about what to do next. So this is the Eggupation. It became a bit of a drama after a while, but we won't talk about that. So these are very important moments where people come together to really try to comprehend how to move forward from there. People who've never really necessarily have conversations before, people who are not necessarily from the same background socially or religiously, and so on. And so this social and civic symbiosis that is happening and that is local, and I'm sure it's happening everywhere, and I don't know enough about all the other countries to talk about them, but these symbioses are happening and are being shared on social media networks because of the networks and the social media themselves, but also because of this increasingly fast happening number of uprisings that are taking over the entire planet. I didn't put that image in, but someone said, you know, if you don't pay attention, this is going to happen to you too. So let's all join now. The important aspects of these gatherings and these kinds of, so this is inside the egg and on top of the egg. So the important aspects is how across border we are exchanging and learning from each other, communicating vertically, meaning across social classes, but also horizontally across geographies and cultures. Bridges are being built very quickly and instantly. And again, I didn't put this video in, but you know, you see protesters in Beirut calling and supporting Iraqi protesters in Baghdad. Digital production is shared via social networks, disseminating these archetypal images that we've been looking at, because they are multiplying as we see them. And why are they multiplying, and why are they constantly, which is what I find really fascinating, why are they constantly repeating themselves and so similar? And when, you know, between China and Egypt, between 89 and 2011, you know, how do we find ourselves living exactly the same moments, looking at exactly the same image? Our systems of sharing media has shifted from television to internet, yet it's the same image and the same viral aspect to this image that sort of grabs us. And maybe because these images are part of these mechanisms themselves are archetypal of how us as human beings respond to moments when we are repressed and contexts in which we are repressed. So it's this aspects of the revolutions that I'm really interested in looking at and working on. This is another example of, this is the actual program of some of the events that are happening in Lebanon in the squares. And again, as people are protesting, they're actually changing the world as they are resisting repression, corruption, and trying to move forward to another order. In this case, Regenerate Lebanon is really interesting, and I think is also again taking a step forward from what we've seen in the last 10 years, because it's really implementing strategies of recycling, strategies of depolluting, strategies of sharing, and strategies of minimal waste. So again, we're lucky in a way in Lebanon is that we do not have to, we haven't been confronting a very extreme police apparatus or military apparatus, which means that the protesters are not only until now peaceful, but they're also able to actually act and take over their territory and kind of reconquer the country as theirs. And this is one of the actions that this community is doing, planting, what's the word, like taking over the urban space and planting trees. This is an example I found from Chile, where neighbors meet to plot paths out of crisis amid exasperation at elite. So these meetings are happening literally everywhere. and people are discussing the ways that they can change the world around them. Baghdad, tuk-tuk revolution. I love tuk-tuks. Tuk-tuks have taken over the revolution, a little bit like the motorcycles in Egypt have taken over the protest, and people were being picked up from the front line to be brought to the pharmacies that were makeshifts in Tahrir. Here, the tuk-tuks are not only sort of supporting and helping the people who are wounded, but they've also become the kind of emblem to the protests that are happening in Baghdad at the moment, with even a newspaper. Apparently, I couldn't find anything online. Maybe you can, but the newspaper, the tuk-tuk newspaper, is one of the ways that the communities are communicating about how to move forward with the revolt. Or more maybe essential or traditional aspects of life take place also in the square, and in the moments of urgency, even though this is your day you're getting married, the emergency of your country is even more big than you are, so people come to the squares and celebrate their wedding in the center of the revolution. Yeah, that little face. Have you ever encountered that little face? So I do a lot because of the work I'm doing, and so many times when I go to look for things that I know are there because I saw them in 2011, I can't find them. And so a lot of times it's because of our dear Google algorithm, which after 2 years takes events like Tahrir to the bottomless pit of its search engine. And even though in theory these things are available on the internet, actually in practice they're not. But more than this, it's also what is being threatened here is also our digital freedom, our digital rights, and our basic rights, our human rights to have access to this knowledge and to have access to this material, because it is in knowing this material and understanding it and sharing it that we can participate to breaking the mechanisms of failed revolutions. And so this is hopefully what on the long term I'm trying to achieve with my projects. An example is in 2011, I remember when China removed the word Egypt from from the little internet that they have engine because of the uprisings taking place in the Arab world. So it was a kind of like, oh God, let's not give them the bad idea of doing the same. Which in a way proves that it's even more necessary to really share these images and share these experiences across the globe. So I'll read this out loud. I don't know if any of you, I'm sure some of you have read The Mushroom at the End of the World on the possibility of life in capitalist ruin. If you haven't, I really highly, strongly advise you do, because it's a book that is very interesting in the way it approaches, it tackles the problem of what happens next, what kind of world we live in next, and also how it really works from this cross-disciplinary perspective. So looking at different ways of thinking rather than staying focused in a kind of niched discipline or field of thinking, of analyzing what's around us. So we are stuck with the problem of living despite economic and ecological ruination. Neither tales of progress nor of ruin tell us how to think about collaborative survival. It is time to pay attention to mushroom picking. Not that this will save us, but it might open our imaginations. Contemporary uprisings mark the beginning of this possibility of life after capitalism, which Anat Singh refers to. Lebanon, the Lebanese protests, more than political And all the other protests that are taking place at the moment or that we've been witnessing in the past few years, more than political, are fundamentally social, psychological, and spiritual revolutions. They ignite radical and immediate shifts in mentalities. They are civic awakenings and reconciliation. In the case of Lebanon again, and I will take that case because again it's a little bit of a different one and it's one that's close to my heart, the protest is a mass healing process from deeply rooted traumas that have been going on for 30 years since the Civil War and 17 years of war. So beyond secularism and the traumas, the protest is pushing the country, the population's country, to evolve. We are evolving. We are moving forward. La lucha continua, like the people in Barcelona are screaming. And to come to the title of this beautiful encounter today, I want to come back to the question that is posed since this morning. Can speaking truth to power unravel the age of disillusion we find ourselves in? I would like to suggest we replace the word disillusion by with no illusions, and rather ask the question, can speaking truth to power unravel the age with no illusions we find ourselves in, as we remove the veils in front of our faces and increasingly awaken? To join the party in Lebanon, it's Revolution DJ from Tripoli, to join in solidarity with those who have lost their lives for these demands and in these revolutions in Chile, Iraq, Spain, Sudan, Bolivia, Hong Kong, Haiti, and so many other places that we don't even talk about in the media, among so many others. Que la lucha continua. Let's all go pick mushrooms. Thank you.